My name is Jim Shakespear. This is the limiting Mimikatz attacks presentation for today. So thanks for coming. Hopefully in the right spot and you got checked out, and thanks for at least coming through the rest of SAINTCON, sticking out to the end. So like I said a little bit earlier, my name is Jim Shakespear. I work at Southern Utah University. I'm the director of IT security there. And I've done a couple of trainings this week, and I'm glad they saved me on the last day so I could have a little bit more time to polish off these slides. I hope I can at least bring a little bit more value to a few of you here. I had given this training a couple years ago at Microsoft in Higher Ed. I had titled it Preventing Mimikatz Attacks. There are just so many more features in Mimikatz these days that I had to switch it to limiting because there's so many more features in there, and we'll go over some of those today. So here's the agenda here. I've also got a link at the bottom there, which might be too small in the back for you to see, for jmshake.com/saint21. You can get my slide deck there, and you can follow along on your own computer if you'd like with that. So for the agenda today, we are going to talk about what is Mimikatz. We're going to do some demos of the Mimikatz tool, and really Mimikatz is credential dumping. So those are the type of attacks that we're going to be trying to limit or mitigate, is being able to credential dump on machines. And so I'll give you some demos of using Mimikatz to do that, but that's really what we're targeting, is trying to get rid of those credential dumps on machines. We'll talk about a few of the protocols or privileges that's used by Mimikatz. And then, of course, the bulk of the session should be preventative measures. How can we prevent these type of attacks? So, what is Mimikatz? Right there, right? Anybody recognize that person? Say, Mimi? From Drew Carey Show and Cats, right? That's where we get it. I don't know where he got the name for it. That is not Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a tool written by Benjamin Duply. And he wrote it in C. He wanted to study some of the security in Windows. And so he started writing this tool to kind of learn C and tinker with Windows security. And that made his name out in the information security world. It's most well known for extracting plain text passwords, extracting password hashes, PIN codes, Kerberos tickets from memory. What it may not be as well known for, if you haven't used it before, is there are a lot of other things it can do. It can create golden and silver tickets and get information with domain trusts or secrets for that. It can synchronize Active Directory objects or do a DC sync where it's saying, hey, yeah, domain controller, I'm also a domain controller. Will you sync some objects to me so I can get their hashes? You can also extract information for the DP API, get to encrypted information within users or computers using the Windows encryption information there. You can extract certificates and certificate private keys. So if you've ever dealt with certificates and maybe you had set up a certificate on a server and a private key for it and you marked it as non-exportable, well, Mimikatz can go at least get that key out for you if you need it. You can do a bunch of different privilege escalation techniques. He's kept up to date. He's put in like print nightmare vulnerabilities as well. So if you want to test out privilege escalation with that, Mimikatz is a great tool for it. And it'll help you also perform pass the hash attacks. That's great. You've probably seen lots of great password cracking rigs. Maybe you've done some password cracking with John or Hashcat. That's nice, but why not just use the hash if you can? Who cares about cracking it if you're allowed to pass the hash in an environment? So I am going to give a couple of demos. For the demo environment that I have set up 2 machines in a domain. One is the domain controller for this vendinc.local. It's a server 2012 R2. The domain functionality level for it was set at 2008 R2, as if we had upgraded in that environment, but we kept an older schema. And then I have a remote apps server that's remote.vendinc.local. This is a server 2019 for hosting remote apps. I know with the With the work from home environment, a lot of people have spun up terminal services, remote apps like this, or Citrix environments that are basically this as well. For this box, there is one non-default setting that I changed for the environment, and that was enabling WDigest. It's not enabled by default in Windows Server 2019, but in earlier versions of Windows, it was enabled by default. Okay, so let's do a little demo. For this demo, what I'm going to be doing is going on that remote app server, and we're going to dump the process for LSASS. LSASS is the process that holds all of the credentials basically for the computer itself. So if anybody logs in there, your credentials are stored in memory in that LSASS process. Okay, so we're going to be authenticating as this Garen user, and I'll show you the password here in just a sec on the screen. And all I'm doing is RDPing to that server. So this class 06 pound is the password for this user account. Log into the desktop here. Server 2019 has Windows Defender enabled and running. So me as an attacker, I don't want to put my Mimikatz executable up there. I could disable Windows Defender and go through all that work. But instead, I'm just going to use Task Manager, go to the LSASS process. I'm going to dump that memory, and I'm just going to go take that memory dump and put it on my own attacker machine, because I'd rather have data where I can control it and I can deal with antivirus rather than sysadmins for this box. So it just dumps it in the temp folder for this user. I'll go grab that lsass.dmp file and copy it down to my machine. For this attack, I don't have to launch Mimikatz as administrator at all. If I was attacking my own attack machine, I probably would want to be an administrator prompt for Mimikatz. But in this one, I'm just going to use the SecURLSA module of Mimikatz and say, hey, I've got a mini dump over here. This is where that file is. We're going to be trying to extract credentials from it. The next command is going to be using that same module, and we're going to do the submodule of WDigest because I knew that I had that enabled on that. Spits out a lot of information. I'm going to scroll up to the top, and we'll see right there some clear text credentials from that remote interactive session number 2 for Garen, and a clear text password for it. The reason I want to do this against a Windows 2019 server in this environment is to let you know, make you all aware, that this is still an option. If attackers will go flip a couple of registry settings, they can make it so that LSASS will store WDigest, which we can dump clear text from memory. Okay. The important piece to that is once those registry settings are enabled, it would take a new authentication to that system before it'll actually store those WDigest credentials in memory. Okay, so it's not like they can flip that bit and then it goes and switches to clear text credentials in memory right then. You have to wait for another logon session before those will show up. Okay. Oops. So let's review. WDigest was enabled on this box. That's a non-default configuration for Server 2019, but it was a default configuration to have that enabled from Windows XP to Windows 8, as well as in Windows Server 2003 up to 2012. Okay, I believe that recent patches of Server 2012 went and disabled that later. Don't quote me on it, but I believe that was the case. And of course, we were able to get plain text credentials from that. Windows Defender was running, up to date, didn't have any cares in the world for dumping LSASS right from Task Manager like that. These are the registry settings to be able to put that WDigest as an enabled protocol on the server, okay, of flipping those bits to 1 for negotiate and use logon credential. Okay, so I'm going to do one more demo to show you how we can get the use an NTLM hash rather than a password to be able to authenticate to the domain. So in this one I do a couple of different things. First is I could easily get the hash out using some other method. Well, I will do that before I actually show my video of the demo of showing you how to get the hash. But in the video that I have for it, I will use a tool called cleartext. It's a PowerShell commandlet from DS internals, just so I can show you that I am putting in the cleartext password and it's spitting out what the NTLM hash for that password would be. And then we're going to use that hash to authenticate to the domain controller. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's do the live demo part here. Grab my Mimikatz. And let me make that text larger. There we go. Is that a little better? Great. All right, so we're going to do that same module. And I got to point to the mini dump file. And then we'll do the same module again. Sec URLSA. And this time I'm going to do the MSV, which this submodule, all I'm telling it is, hey, look through that memory dump file and just give me any NTLM hashes. It'll spit out a few other types of hashes, but I basically want the NTLM hash. It goes through. Of course, it gets lots of information. We get NTLM hashes for the machine itself, any other users that are logged in. But the one I want for that is this AGARAN user. And this is the NTLM hash that we can also use to authenticate if we don't have the cleartext password for an account. So with that, let's go ahead and watch the video of doing a pass the hash with Mimikatz. Okay, so this time I've got a PowerShell open because I am going to use that PowerShell commandlet. Just showing you that I'm running on my attacker box. It's not like a domain joined account or anything like that. My attacker box is not able to authenticate to a domain controller. You can use that netview command and then give it a path to the domain controller to see if I can get into the sysvol share or anything like that. Okay, so I can't with my attacker account. That's given, right? It shouldn't be able to get into it without some kind of domain creds. And then this is where I'm using the module for convert to NT hash. It is expecting a secure string from PowerShell. And so that convert to NT hash, we're going to go put in that password that's stored in that variable. And that hash should look familiar. That's just what we dumped with the sec URLSA Mimikatz module MSV. For this attack, I'm using another command here with Mimikatz. It's privilege debug. I want to go get a debug privilege on my own attack box so that I will be able to manipulate memory on my own attacker box. Then I'm going to use the sec URLSA PTH or pass the hash submodule. I'm going to give it the username, the domain, and then the NTLM hash. What Mimikatz is going to do is it's going to take that hash for that user and that information and inject it into a command, a cmd.exe. So now if I authenticate over the network, I'm going to be using that user's username and NTLM hash to authenticate. And now I can hit the domain controller. I can see that netlogon and sysvol share that exists in every AD environment. Okay? So that's just a quick test of showing, yes, I've got valid creds. I don't have to know the clear text value for that. I can just use a hash. Okay? Okay, so quick review on this. NTLM hash is the more commonly dumped hash that you'd probably see in an attack environment or attack situation in your network. It's probably going to be they're going to dump the hash. They're not going to take the time to try and crack it. They're going to just try and use that and pass it all over your network and see if they can get elevated or escalated privileges on other machines on your network. Okay? Okay, so hopefully the bulk of this presentation now is how do we limit it? What are the mitigating controls that we can put in place for this? So for the dumping LSASS, I've found this is a very beneficial way of preventing them from even getting to the memory in the first place. Okay? There is a debug privilege that users can have in your domain if they are an administrator on a server, workstation, wherever. As long as they're in the administrators group, by default, they will have access to this debug privilege. What that allows them to do is it would allow them to connect to any process running on that machine and be able to even attach to the kernel as if it's a debugger, which will allow it to have rights to not only read the memory, but also to write or inject their own information into the memory. Windows 10 does have a few other protections for the LSASS process. There are other ways of getting around those, but this debug process or this debug privilege is still needed. Okay, so there is a way in group policy that we could disable anybody from having that debug privilege. Okay, so if there's any programmers out there, anybody that does programming and you know you have to debug your own programs and things like that, that's fine. You do not need this debug privilege to debug your own stuff that you're doing like Visual Studio or anything like that. You have access on your user account to any processes that you launch under, that's under your security settings, basically, under your credentials. Okay, LSASS lives as system on the box, okay, and you would not have access to debug that if this debug privilege is taken away. We have implemented this in our environment. We have for years. I have had no issues with taking away this debug privilege. A quick way of verifying and seeing that, whether your account has that, is you can just launch an admin prompt, admin CMD prompt, type in whoami/priv, and you'll be able to see, I believe I got it here, this SE debug privilege. Okay, and you'll notice by default on this one, if you look over to the other side, that it is disabled in the command prompt. So that's why in Mimikatz, when I was running that module that I did a privilege debug, is Mimikatz was requesting access to be able to use that debug privilege to then make its process have that availability of reading the memory of other processes on the machine. Okay, so this is by default. So I just ran an RSOP resultant set of policy to see what policies are default applied. I believe this is on the Server 2019 box, so recent version of Windows. And by default, if you're in the administrators group, you have that debug programs privilege. Okay, so how would we fix that? We go into group policy. We go into computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, dump into local policies, and then the user rights assignment. And then there is a debug programs policy. You'll want to define those policy settings and put nobody, no groups, no users in that policy. And then it'll go throughout your environment and it will remove the administrators group out of that debug policy throughout your domain. We've done this against our domain controllers, servers, end user workstations. The whole domain gets that policy, and I have seen no adverse effects in my environment. But I would suggest if you are going to roll it out, I would roll it out to a subsection of your end users. If you don't hear anything, all of your end user workstations, then roll it out to servers after that, and then roll it out to your domain controllers. Okay, that would be the way I would roll it out. WDigest. Okay, so I showed you this is the protocol that was able to give us at least cleartext credentials right out of the gate. So how would we mitigate WDigest? first you want to know where WDigest is even authenticating on your domain. And so what you can do is on your domain controller, if you have any event logs for this, hopefully you have auditing turned on in your domain controller to audit login processes, successes and failures. And you just want to go look for event ID 4776 on your domain controller, and that would tell you of anybody that's trying to authenticate to your domain with WDigest. If you're on the server itself that would be doing WDigest, then you're going to be looking for 4624s for the event IDs there. So the way that I would mitigate this, or for turning off in my environment, so I do my auditing, I don't see that anything is authenticating with WDigest protocol at all in my domain, then I'll know I'll be safe to roll out this policy. And I would just do group policy, do a group policy preference, and get these registry settings that we had before. Okay, remember I told you we flipped to 1 for both of these for negotiate and use logon credential so that we could attack that box. So when you do the remediation step here, you want to do 0 for it. We want to turn that off. Okay, WDigest, turn it off in your environment. All right, pass the hash. How can we limit pass the hash vulnerabilities in our domain? So again, that same debug privilege will help in your environment in this case. Okay, so let's say an attacker is on a domain joined machine and they've tried, disabling Windows Defender and all that so that they can at least get Mimikatz or some other tool that can do credential dumping on the box. If I have the debug privilege removed, they are not going to be able to read LSASS. They are not going to be able to inject their own information into LSASS to authenticate as other users or things like that with an NTLM hash. Okay, so that same debug privilege, I would remove that privilege in your domain, and that's going to help with pass the hash. One of the other things that is very beneficial, Microsoft is aware of these for years. They have been rolling out mitigations and patches and improvements. In your Active Directory environment, you need to keep not only your domain controllers patched and up to date, right? You also need to make sure you're doing new OS versions on them. Okay? So with 2012 R2, they added the protected users group. Make sure you also update your domain functionality to at least 2012 R2 so that you can get the full benefits of the protected users group. I would suggest we're far enough along here. Windows Server 2016 for domain controllers is great. I haven't had any issues in our environment. Latest and greatest 2019, that would be great too. They keep rolling in more and more benefits, more and more security benefits into the domain. Just make sure all your domain controllers are more recent versions of Windows, and then don't forget to raise the domain functionality as well as the forest functionality. There are caveats to that, so make sure that you're not going to break any other software by doing that, because that is not a revert kind of process for the domain functionality being bumped in the environment. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what the protected users group is. The protected users group was added in Windows Server 2012, and it will do a couple of things to accounts that are in that group. First, it's going to make it so they can only authenticate with Kerberos. They cannot authenticate with NTLM. Okay, so that's already a big win, because then we can't pass the hash with NTLM and go authenticate to a whole bunch of machines with it. Okay, so right there's a really big benefit. If you're also in that group, the Kerberos authentication is going to use AES instead of like RC4 ciphers or things like that. It will use higher ciphers for its encryption process. And so I did put some notes in here that if you have to update your domain functionality level to something from 2008 up into 2012 R2 or higher, okay? So we're coming from 2008 and jumping up. You will need to do a password change right after you do your domain functionality level. You'll want to do a password change on any accounts that you will put into the protected users group. And the explanation for that is the old way that it stored passwords has like storing for Kerberos with RC4 ciphers and older ciphers, but it doesn't have those AES ones yet. So you have to do a password change after you've updated your domain functionality level, but before you put them in the protected users group. Okay? Once you've changed your password there, and then it's got all the information where it can do the AES ciphers for Kerberos authentication, then you'll be able to put that user into the protected users group. Okay? So user accounts that I would put in there is, it's going to be your privileged users in AD. Okay? If it's users that have local admin on all your boxes across your environment, you will want to put them in the protected users group. One of the other benefits of being in the protected users group is it will not cache those credentials on the machines that you log into. Okay? So in Mimikatz, I was showing you how to dump from the LSASS process for things. But there are also other ways of dumping credentials out of registry. So if I had logged into a computer, I'm logged out, I don't have any current sessions on the box, there are still domain cached credentials that live in the registry, and Mimikatz can go extract those. That will not have the NTLM hash. It should have the DCC2 domain cache credentials version 2 in there. Those are harder to crack, and they are not pass the hash type credentials. Okay, you'd have to crack them to be able to use them, and they're slow cracking. So, but that's the other benefit with the protected users group. So I would put like my help desk or anybody that can kind of reset passwords, their admin on boxes out in your environment. I would put them in the protected users group. You'd want to probably put your server administrators in there. Asterisk, make sure you test before you do that. If your admins are only doing Kerberos authentication all over in your network with all of our tools, it's probably going to work just fine. Okay. I believe Microsoft says do not put domain admins in there. I have heard other people suggest that you can put domain admins in there. So I would say, again, test. You may want a break glass account, an account that you do not use normally that is a member of domain admins. You just go and you know, put its password somewhere safe, maybe print it out, throw it in a lockbox, whatever. It's your break glass account. You can keep that one out because you're not authenticating normally with it. And then maybe you'll want to put all the rest of your domain admins into that group to give those extra protections. If I were to roll it out, that would be the way I would do it. One of the other things that we can do to help prevent pass the hash is just use the Windows firewall. Okay, group policy can configure that. Yeah, Windows firewall isn't sexy or anything like that, but it will prevent a lot of these attacks. So I would disable inbound 445. Again, test that, what really needs to get inbound to some end user's workstation with port 445. There may be exceptions to that. I had somebody suggest earlier this week that, yeah, that's if you want to be able to find out where your rogue print servers are on your network, go and disable port 445 all over in your network, okay? And maybe that is a security win for you. You probably are going to have some struggles when you flip that over, but it will provide protection there. The way I would do that in an environment is you can run a netsh.exe command to configure Windows Firewall, and there's a way of disabling the groups for like file and print sharing, because that uses 445. And you disable the groups for, can't remember the other one off the top of my head. There are some, if you open up Windows Firewall and look for port 445, you will see it'll have group names that are associated with that port. And you can use that netsh command. Just throw a group policy together, it runs a script that goes and runs disabling those across your network. That way, if you do have exceptions, so you find a computer, you're like, oh, there is a legitimate business case, because we're here to support the business, right? We got to support their functions. So if you find a business case for it, just go into Windows Firewall, create some new rule that's not one of those groups or anything like that, just a straight up rule allowing 445 from whatever IP address needs to get to it. Okay. Again, too, if you're using like SCCM or things like that where you're going to do remoting into boxes from some kind of admin environment, you can push out a group policy, say, hey, Windows Firewall, I want to create a new rule, and go and open up 445 from these servers or these IT computers or things like that. Okay, that works really great. It has limited the assessment team that comes and assesses our environment, has limited them significantly. I would do that same thing for ports 135, which is your RPC, allows for WMI remoting type capabilities and execution, and then 59, 85, and 86 for any PowerShell remoting. Okay. So patch the hash continued. What else can we do to mitigate it? There's a tool called NetSAINTCON. If you have not heard of NetSAINTCON, you can go here and learn about NetSAINTCON. Really easy to implement. You'll import a PowerShell module, run a command to set up some different permissions for who is allowed to remotely query some other machine and ask who is logged into that remote machine. Okay? By default, any domain user can enumerate who is working on some other workstation. Okay? So as some low-prived, I'm some little HR student worker or something like that, as long as I've got some kind of domain cred, not privileged at all, I can go ask the domain controller, hey domain controller, who is logged in or authenticated to you? Okay? And people are authenticating on the network all the time to the domain controller for like updating group policy or things like that. And so it'll spit back and be like, hey, here's my current connections of people that are connected to the domain controller. NetSAINTCON is the tool that will block that. It will go through your environment, and the reason there's a tool for it, because it's really just a registry setting, but the registry setting is a reg binary, and so it stores all of these permissions in some really hard binary format. And so this PowerShell module will be able to go and put the right binary format for setting up the permissions of who has access to query users on other machines. Okay, so this is a great tool. Again, it has been very low impact in our environment. I have not had any issues that I am aware of as we rolled that out across our domain of breaking any functionality. LAPS. Let's talk a little bit about LAPS. So Microsoft Local Administrator Password Solution. If you're not using that, there are alternative ways, but this gets around the for each machine on the domain, I put some local account on there that is admin on the boxes so that I can be able to log in and have admin privileges if it loses its domain trust or things like that. I have some local account to backdoor and get in on the machine. LAPS is that kind of tool. It works within Active Directory to go and create unique passwords for all your workstations in your environment, and then it will store those in Active Directory for you. And if you're a member of a group that can read that attribute, you can go and read what the password is for the local administrator account for that machine. Okay? This really helps prevent pass the hash because you have unique passwords across all of your devices. It will go through and consistently change those passwords. So you've got that management of passwords are changing all the time on all of those workstations. So it's a great tool to do that. If you're not ready to dive all in on LAPS, there are a couple other mitigating controls that you can put in place. So this alternative here is to use group policy to limit your lateral movement. So let's say you've got some account, just every time you image, you go and put, this is the admin account, this is the password for it, and it's the same on all your computers. What you can do in your domain is put a policy together like this for the computer configuration policies, Windows settings, security settings, local policies, and then the user rights assignment. There are two policies within that for denying access to the computer from the network. Okay, that one is just basically saying any local accounts, because you'll notice over there on my settings there, any members that has a local account on the machine and a member of the administrators group, they cannot log in over the network. Okay, so that might cause some problems if that is the account you log in with all of your computers and you do it remotely through your workflow. Okay, but hopefully if it's a domain joined machine, you have some other account that you're connecting and have admin privileges on the box. Okay, but this would allow you, so over the network you can't log in, and then also deny logon through terminal services. This is I cannot RDP using a local account onto that box. So these limit it, so you have to physically be there to be able to log in with that local account. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And that would be a great way of limiting pass the hash. Okay, let's move into a more holistic approach here of how we can prevent a lot of these Mimikatz credential dumping type attacks. And I'm going to go over a tiered approach, okay, of how you should set up your domain environment. In IT, I know we already have lots of credentials. Hopefully you have a password manager, so you have lots of your credentials stored and are able to access them. You should, in your AD environment, have multiple IT accounts. Okay, I'm going to work from the top down of your highest privilege type 1s and then move down to your lower privileges as we go here. So first, domain admins. Where should domain admins log in on your network? Where should they log in? Only the domain controllers, okay, nowhere else. Only the domain controllers is where a domain admin should log in, okay? I am aware there are tools that ask for domain admin credentials on some other boxes. I'll give an example here. If you're doing Azure Active Directory sync, at some point in that process, it's going to ask you for domain admin credentials, okay? That does not mean that you have to physically log into the box as domain admin when you're configuring it. You can configure it as being an admin on that box, but not a member of the domain admins. And the wizard that Microsoft walks you through will ask for those credentials at some point to go and make the connection, do all of its work that it needs to do against configuring your AD environment, and then it's done with that process. It's done with using those domain admin credentials. Okay? You do not physically RDP and log in with domain admin on other boxes. You only log in with domain admin into the Windows environment to domain controllers. Okay? Did I pound that in far enough for you? Okay. That limits so much. So I just want to make sure that you get that idea. Your enterprise admin and schema admins group, leave them empty. Okay? Do not have people in there. I'm going to also throw in here, I probably should have put it on the slides, the default administrator for your domain as well. You may want to have that account disabled, or it is your break glass account. You should just not be using that for anybody in IT. Okay, give them their own credential. If they really need domain admin, give them their own credential. Don't just share the admin account for AD for everybody to use. Okay, we want to make sure that we have good auditing of who is actually logging in. Okay, so these groups should be empty all the time, except for when you actually need them. So let's say you set up some Active Directory certificate services. Yeah, you will need an account that's enterprise admin to go and configure some things like deploying templates for your certificates into the domain. It needs to be enterprise admin. Great, go put an account, go put it in enterprise admins, do your configurations, publish your templates, and then get it out of that group when you're done. Okay? Other privileged or specialized privileges in your AD. If there's a box that is rarely logged into, it does some important privileged function, you may want to create a different account for that. And I'll give you an example. Azure AD. If you're doing Azure AD sync, you have a different server that is doing that sync process to sync information out to Microsoft. I would assume that you will at some point use password hash sync. So that means it needs to go talk to a domain controller. It needs to ask the domain controller to pass the NTLM hash for those accounts so that it can go and add some other hashing to it and upload it to Microsoft. Okay, it has rights to do, like in Mimikatz I talked about DC sync of, hey, I'm a domain controller, send those creds to me. That same MSOL underscore and a bunch of numbers and letters, that account used for Azure AD Sync has privileges to just go ask for the NTLM hash from your domain. Okay, so on that server, I would isolate the heck out of that server. Okay, go put it somewhere. Nobody needs to hit it. It does need to get out to the cloud to Microsoft to send that information, and it needs to talk to your domain controllers to be able to ask for those hashes. I would make sure that the only administrator on that box is some account that's probably separate from all of your other accounts. It's separate from your daily driver account for managing servers and things like that. Okay, it can be a different privileged user and take all the other administrators out of it. Server privileged, okay? If you do any maintenance on servers or you do it all the time, this is the account that you live in all the time when you're logging into servers. In this tier, server admins only log into servers with it. They do not log into workstations with it. Okay? We need to make sure that we keep these all in separate silos. Okay? Domain admins only log into domain controllers. Server admins only log into servers to do their work. Okay? Workstation privilege. Okay, this is your separate account that will get you access to be local admin on all the workstations in your end user environment. Okay, so that may be part of your job. If you may have a server account that you do your server work, and a separate account for when you go and log into the workstation for some machine, have your admin rights, go install software, configure printers, all that kind of fun stuff for people. Okay, those are separate accounts. This would be a good place where you'd put maybe help desk users. So if help desk needs to go out and do that admin work for you, install programs for people, you could put them in there. That is also a great candidate for the protected users group. Okay, your admins are going out, they're going to some employee's computer, log in, install software. Because they're in protected users, their credentials don't get cached on the box. They do a Kerberos login. There's no NTLM hash to go dump. So it gives some good protection there. So anything in your workstation privilege is great for protected users. Your server privilege, mileage may vary. Okay, right? There might be some old programs that still need some kind of NTLM hashing there, and maybe your server admins need that, maybe not. Okay? And then last, your least privilege. This is the one you got when you started your job, day one, right? You should not be adding extra privileges to that account. It should be just like any other employee on the network. Shouldn't be a member of any any privilege type groups. Now, yeah, maybe you might add it to some groups so that you can do some auditing, and so that you can know, hey, this is an IT account. It's for an IT person. And maybe I want to make sure that they're in a group so that I can do some kind of alerting or logs on it. That's fine, but don't give it any privileged access. Another good hygiene that you should do is make sure that you reset the password for krbtgt. This is a special account in Active Directory. It is disabled by default. Leave it as disabled. It should always be disabled. What Microsoft does is it uses the password hashes for this account to generate Kerberos tickets. Okay? It uses whatever the current password is on that account to help generate those tickets, and then the previous password on the account can also authenticate users, finish out with those sessions on it, basically. So if I had already created a Kerberos ticket, it has been signed with that hash, and then I go and change the password to krbtgt. My session that was signed with that previous ticket is still valid. By default in AD, it's valid for 10 hours. Okay? So you need to do a password reset of that account twice to invalidate all of the Kerberos tickets in your environment. I'll tell you the way that we do that in our environment is we simply have a process where we go in monthly. It's going to go change the password on that account on one day. The next day it changes that password account again, and then we've changed it twice in a relatively short period of time that invalidated all the tickets in our environment. Those tickets are important because if you've heard of the golden ticket, you can use the hash for the krbtgt account and generate a Kerberos ticket that can authenticate you to anybody you want. Okay? You can set one up as a domain admin, and then you can just go and you are that account via Kerberos logins in that environment. And you can also, so yeah, the default is 10 hours on the ticket lifetime, but you can also say that golden ticket, it has a lifetime. It's going to live out till 2112, okay, that year. So I can have a ticket that I forge and make that lifetime longer. So that's why we want to make sure that we change that password on a regular basis. If you run any reports, how many out there maybe run Ping Castle or Purple Knight or things like that in your environment? Great. It will tell you about that. It'll say, hey, the password on this account hasn't changed for a while. You should go change it. And it'll give you articles with some information on that. Okay, we are to the point that we have time for questions. So, do I have any questions out there? And if I don't repeat your question, remind me, because I want to make sure that those streaming can also hear. So, any questions for me on protecting your environment from Mimikatz or credential dumping type attacks? Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, so his question was with LAPS. LAPS is configured for changing and managing passwords for the local accounts, local admin accounts on boxes. So it's not like the domain joined accounts. He said, does LAPS have any other tie-ins to give your other admin accounts that are domain accounts? Does it give them any protections? And I'll say no. No, it does not give any other protections. It's just for managing local admin passwords on your systems there. Correct. Yep, so the comment back here was, what it does in your domain environment is it puts the password to that local admin account in Active Directory for you. And if you are a member of the LAPS group, that you have permissions to go and read that from Active Directory to log into the box. Okay, so that's what it really changes in your domain, is it extends the schema and gives an attribute to be able to read that LAPS password that is in the local account on the box. Yes?
How do you prevent Mimikatz attacks on service accounts that tend to collect a lot of data and by their nature not have the same level of security as regular user accounts?
Okay, so how would I limit attacks with Mimikatz or credential dumping for service accounts or things like that? So I'm going to kind of steer that question a little bit into your service accounts, or maybe those ones that that you can do Kerberos type attacks with, or things like that. For mitigating Kerberos attacks, make sure you put a good long password on those accounts. That is the mitigating factor that I can think of, as well as doing group managed service accounts. Again, you'll have to make sure that your domain controller is on a later version of Windows, that your domain functionality is high enough to support managed service accounts or group managed service accounts. I've got pretty good mileage with group managed service accounts. In some cases, a lot of applications do not talk about being able to use a group managed service account for the product, but I have been able to get that to work. Okay, so if you can configure a group managed service account, that would be awesome. Make sure you go and look at all your accounts that have the SPN attribute, and make sure that the application still even needs to use an SPN to do that. In a lot of cases, there's old service accounts. It's just hygiene. You just need to make sure and remove those accounts that are no longer in use that have SPNs, because those are Kerberoastable accounts. And remove those, put really long passwords on your service accounts. And yeah, that does take a lot of work. Okay, there's no fancy group policy to just go out and say, yeah, go manage my service accounts for me there. It's going to take some work to either convert it to group managed service accounts, or go through and change it to a good long password that's going to be hard to crack. Okay, the good thing is with like a Kerberos attack is it's going to give you a Kerberos hash. As far as cracking power, it's going to take longer to crack Kerberos than it is to be like an NTLM hash. So I've got a 5-year-old laptop up here. I do some password cracking on it. It's got a little GPU in it. I can crack millions of passwords, or do guesses of millions of passwords a second with this 5-year-old laptop with an NTLM hash. Okay, the Kerberos hash is significantly different. I can't remember that off the top of my head for this box, but there's a difference there. Okay, I think I saw another hand. I think it was over this way, or maybe not. Okay, I see one in the back here. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so the question was with the with the krbtgt account, how often am I changing the password for that, and do I do any automation for that? Yes, I do change it, and I do change it monthly in our environment. I believe tools like Pingcastle and Purple Knight, they'll probably suggest something like 60 or 90 days, every 60 or 90 days to change that. That would work great. In our environment, when I set it up years and years ago, I just monthly was easy enough to do. I haven't seen any adverse effects of doing it that way. And then when I originally did it, I thought you needed to make sure that there was a 10-hour gap in between changing it twice to be able to clear things out. If your domain was under attack and you needed to clear all the Kerberos tickets in your environment, you just want to go change that password really quick, twice. Okay, it's not going to like cause your domain to not work or anything like that. The devices will just have to re-authenticate to the domain controller and ask for a new Kerberos ticket. So that's kind of what we've done in our environment. It is automated. I can't remember exactly where I got the script. There is a PowerShell script that walks you through doing it. The nice thing with the PowerShell script for it is it will go and change the password and ensure that it quickly syncs to the rest of your domain controllers, so that all your domain controllers are updated, and then it will let you know, hey, all of the domain controllers have the new krbtgt account password synced, so you're good to go. There is a script that does that. It is a manual script to run. I did some PowerShell modding, and I have it run automatically, send me an email report when it's run, and spit out the output so that I know that it runs monthly. So thanks for that question. Yes, in the back.
Let's say you have some cache credentials, you don't want cache anymore. Is there a script or a process you can go through to clear those out?
Yes. The question for that was, with cached credentials, is there a way of clearing cached credentials out in your environment? Yes, there is. There is a group policy setting. I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it's on my slides from the Microsoft presentation. If you went to career.jmshake.com, on that website I have links to when I did those presentations a couple years ago, and I do have a link with more information, or at least a group policy picture for that, of the group policy setting that you can go through and say, get rid of cache credentials on boxes. Okay? There are some caveats to that. Okay? We've got a mobile workforce. If you've got laptops, you may not want to remove cache credentials for everybody on those kind of environments. So there are some things you have to be aware of with that. But as far as your privileged admin accounts type things, protected users group so that they don't get there in the first place. And once they're in the protected users group, I would change my password. That will invalidate all the cache creds. And even leaving them out there, if an attacker finds those cache creds and they want to try and crack a DCC2 hash or whatever like that, and it's going to take them forever, and if they are successful in cracking it, it's an old password, so it's not going to do any good in your environment anymore anyway. So, okay, great question, thanks. Any other questions for me? Yes? The website. So we asked what was the website to be able to go up and look up some information with other slides that I've done at previous trainings. It is career.jmshake.com. Okay. And I think I did some Google slides. And so there should be a link to the conference that I went to where I presented, and then you can go to that conference website and get those slides. Okay. Any other questions for me? See where we're at on time. I do have a couple more minutes. I will hang out in here if you want to ask more personal one-on-one kind of conversations. I'll hang out here for a little bit. But thank you for coming. I hope you've enjoyed SAINTCON. If you haven't had the opportunity to present before or get involved that way, I invite you to think about it. I might act like I'm an expert on a lot of these things. There are a lot of things that I'm not an expert on. But I still wouldn't be shy to present at least what I know and have discussions with good people like you and solve a lot of these problems. A little story time. I presented at Microsoft in higher ed. It was basically this same presentation, and I threw out with the krbtgt account, you have to reset the password once and wait 10 hours, and then you can reset it again. And I got called out. No, you don't have to do it that way. You can double krbtgt reset right in a row, and it's not going to break your environment. All of your devices will have to re-authenticate to do Kerberos again, but it works out just fine. Okay, so I'm good with getting called out if I'm presenting misinformation, and so come here, present, share. Sharing knowledge is always a good thing. So thanks for coming.